The miraculous development turned into a nightmare within months. Its former name is Siam. Thailand means the land of the free people. They expressed that the Western European empires were never colonies. This is a serious privilege for that region. Their population is around 60 million. A mixed ethnic mosaic, 80% are of Thai origin, 12% are Chinese, then there are Malays, 4%. Official and commercial languages are English. The capital is Bangkok. Thailand transitioned to a planned economy in 1961. Agriculture slightly exceeds 11% of their GNP. The staple food is rice. Rubber is the main export product. Another Asian tiger is Malaysia. A federation of Sabah and Sarawak stretching along the northern coast of Indochina or the Malay Peninsula and the island of Borneo. The official religion is Islam, but the Malaysian people are a textbook example of the definition of mosaic. There are Malays, there are Chinese, there are Indians of Indo-Pakistani descent, there are other tribes. For example, the Chinese did not accept Islam. So are the Indians. The country was a British colony until 1957. Already throughout the history of the region could not get rid of the colonialists. Portuguese, Dutch, French. Even the Japanese in World War II. Politics is under the control of the Malays, but the economy and trade are the Chinese minority. The country has been the scene of bloody conflicts between these two ethnic groups for a long time. Capital Kuala Lumpur. The third tiger, Indonesia, is perhaps the most interesting. It is a country built on 13,000 islands and, according to some sources, 17,000 islands spread across the Indian and Pacific Oceans. The largest of the islands are Sumatra, Kalimantan, Sulawesi, Java. The Indonesians trace their history to AD 100. They last up to a year. Like Malaysia, Indonesia is a country that could not take its head from European colonialists. The first to arrive are the Portuguese. They bring Catholicism. From behind, the Dutch promote Protestantism. The British were there in the early 1600s. The French in 1769. The colonizers are at war with the indigenous peoples and each other. In the end, the Dutch win. They are there from the early 1800s until the end of the Second World War. In the 1850s, 30% of the Dutch budget was income from Indonesia. Income from coffee, tobacco, and oil. Indonesia is paying the price for the industrialization and development of the Netherlands. In 1942, they are invaded by the Japanese. Sukarno shines as the country's first true national leader during the years of the invasion. He remains president from independence in 1950 until he was overthrown by General Suharto in 1966. Suharto was in power when the 1997 crisis broke out. The fourth tiger, Korea, in the northeastern corner of Asia, an ancient country, yet emerged as a nation in 1945. 1945 is the year the USA and the Soviet Union divided the country into North and South Korea. South Korea became a democratic republic in 1948, the same year it elected its first president, Syngman Rhee, a Harvard graduate. Rhee is known for her arbitrary rule. Its primary purpose was to suppress leftist groups supported by North Korea. In 1950, North Korea declared war and they nearly wiped South Korea off the map. After North Korea was repelled, Rhee passed a law called the National Security Act, which turned the political system into a de facto dictatorship. He was forced to resign when the frauds in the 1960 elections aroused the masses. The park is one of the turning points in Korean economic history. Because in 1965, he made an agreement with Japan to receive economic aid in return for war reparations, and Japanese capital flowed to Korea. He enacted a new constitution that severely restricted individual rights. It is ironic, but it seems that the spectacular economic development in South Korea was possible with this constitution. Exports exploded during the Park period, and Korean products managed to settle in the international market with their own brands. On the other hand, the people were getting more and more oppressed and more unhappy. Finally, in 1979, Park was murdered by the head of the Secret Service. The top three Asian tigers, Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia, were the countries cited as examples of the capitalist development model by the IMF and the World Bank. Why? Because all three of them integrated into the international economy as the IMF and the World Bank found right, and adopted the export-based, free market economy. State intervention in the economy was almost non-existent in either of them. Foreign capital came spontaneously and directly, as it should have been. As we saw, things were different in the fourth tiger, South Korea. In South Korea, the state also repressively directed the economy and succeeded. The dissidents said that Korea's participation in the tigers made the IMF and World Bank experts do not know what to say. Opponents further claimed that the 1997 South Asian crisis resulted from the export-based, free market economy model favored by the IMF and the World Bank, and they were strongly opposed to the insistence on the same lame methods for the resolution of the crisis. Although the Asian tigers' unlabeled capitalism or corruption went hand in hand with growth, the causes of the crisis were too deep to be explained by these distortions. According to the opponents, meanwhile, unlaunched capitalism means capitalism that ignores business ethics. The IMF will be made without examining the model itself, and they said that the World Bank aid would do nothing but secure the money of foreign creditors, and would even leave the country's economies weaker and the people of the country poorer than before. When we look at it from here today, we see that the roots of the 1997 crisis go back to the first half of the 1980s. In those years, Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia were in distress, as were most countries whose exports depended on natural resources such as oil and minerals. Exports were losing value, countries were having a hard time paying their debts. Fearing that they would have to declare a moratorium, Thailand and Indonesia sought help from the IMF even in those years, and they started to implement the prescription suggested by the IMF. The recipe was what critics called the customary IMF prescription: privatization, liberalization of trade rules to pave the way for exports, direct entry of foreign capital into the country, renewal of foreign debt, and austerity. In those years, Japanese capital came to the rescue of Asian pots. That is, the USA, which complained that cheap Japanese goods, especially Japanese cars, had occupied its markets since the early 80s, pressured Japan to increase the value of the yen and to end dumping. Japan succumbed to pressure in 1985, increasing the value of the yen. However, it transferred its production to foreign countries in order to prevent the loss due to declining exports. In other words, they chose to export what they could not do from their own countries, from the factories they established in foreign countries. Among the countries the Japanese chose to invest directly in were Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia, where workers' wages were particularly low.